Have we seen the last of Shaq Thompson in Carolina? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get those weekly Friday mailbag questions in right now. And want to quickly give y'all an update. I was alerted by one of our listeners that the podcast had not been showing up on Apple Podcasts since last Thursday. Apparently that's been corrected. Reached out to Locked On, made sure all that was going on. So again, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. If you listen on Apple, you can listen on Spotify. You can listen to an ad-free version, by the way, on Amazon. But all those shows are there. Talked at length about Myles Garrett, Cooper Kupp, those situations, whether it makes sense for Carolina on Friday. On Monday, talk about the defensive line. And then, of course, yesterday, talk about the outside linebackers, the edge rushers, which maybe you missed that. I think that was out there. And then, of course, today we're going to talk about the linebacker. So if you missed any of those shows in your feed, in your Apple podcast feed, in particular the last couple of days, please go back, listen to those, get my thoughts on some of those things that we had talked about the Panthers and where they stand heading into the free agency period in about a month's time. Looking at the linebackers and how the season played out for them in 2024, it was nothing short of an injury-plagued season for that entire unit, as 6 different players had to start at inside linebacker. And around, not even this time last year, but once they signed Josey, Jewell, and you knew Shaq Thompson was coming off of injury, and even when they drafted Trevin Wallace, you figured it was going to be Shaq and it was going to be Josey, Jewell the entire season. Unfortunately, Shaq Thompson tore his Achilles against Cincinnati and missed the final 13 games of the season. Josey Jewell, he dealt with several injuries where he missed 5 games last year. Trevin Wallace, he missed 4 games, missing the final 4 with, I believe, a shoulder injury. Claude Sherrillis even had stepped in there at a point in time where he and Trevin Wallace, I believe, they started the game on the road in Chicago against the Bears. Those two both missed time at the end of the season, and Claude Sherrillis missed 3 games as well. And looking back at how they played overall, like Shaq did not play enough to really grade him and how he performed this season. I thought he was fine. But again, only 4 games, really. It was 3 3/4 as he was injured. I believe in that third quarter is when he went out of that game against Cincinnati in week 4. But Josey Jewell was one of the big free agent signings that Carolina made a year ago on the defense as they were trying to rebuild that side of the ball. He was the Frankie Louvu replacement. Louvu leaving in free agency, decided to take a lesser deal to go to Washington to play in Dan Quinn's defense, and certainly turned out to be the best decision for him as a player, as he was excellent on the field as a Pro Bowler this past season up there in Washington with the Commanders playing, obviously, in the NFC Championship game. Josey Jewell came in, played 12 games, and it was up and down. Early on in the season, wasn't great, got injured, came back, went back to Denver where he had played with Jero Rivera. A big reason why he came here was that career year he had a couple years ago in 2022 with the Jero Rivera as the first-time defensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos when Nathaniel Hackett was still the head coach. And this season, when he came back, played against Denver, and the next couple weeks after that, played some good ball, but then got injured, missed the final couple weeks of the season, and it was just an up-and-down year. Probably not the kind of season you expected out of Josey Jewell when Carolina went out there and signed him, especially considering his past with the DC. Jero Rivera had 97 tackles, a career-high 3.5 sacks, which was nice to see. That was one of the things I wondered, losing Frankie Louvu, who is a really good pass rusher at that linebacker spot, and had to play more inside back in 2023 because of the Shaq Thompson injury than he probably would have played had Shaq Thompson been healthy the entire season. And maybe that played a factor in him deciding not to come back, but also the roles that they want to utilize inside linebackers. It's not necessarily being all over the field. And you can kind of talk about with J.C. Horn at corner. He doesn't travel. It's just not a part of the scheme. And again, another reason why a lot of people would point to why is Jero Rivera still the defensive coordinator, aside from just the sheer facts that this defense has not been good of the 2 seasons he's been to DC. But either way, Josey had career high in 3.5 sacks. Look at PFF, had a 56.5 PFF grade. That was 68 out of 84 linebackers, the lowest of his career. So we'll see whether he's able to bounce back and have a healthier season and also a more productive season overall. Because again, 97 tackles, that looks nice, but you watch the games and you realize that was not necessarily the Josey Jewell you were hoping to get for the most part in 2024. Trevin Wallace, the 3rd-round pick out of Kentucky, that certainly surprised a lot of people on draft night. You did not look at linebacker with Shaq Thompson coming off injury and was signing Josey Jewell to a 3-year deal as a spot that Carolina would want to address as early as day 2 of the NFL draft. Well, they decided that they did want to address it by taking Trevin Wallace in the 3rd round out of Kentucky. He ended up starting 8 games and ended up being a really good move because of the injury that Shaq Thompson suffered. Now, you cannot foresee Shaq Thompson tearing his Achilles and then missing the final 13 games and then your rookie coming in. But it was very clear during training camp that of all the rookies, the one who looked the most ready to make an impact was Trevin Wallace. And it wasn't that Xavier Legette was not going to make an impact eventually. It's just he had all those injuries where he was not ready to go right away. And that Jonathan Mingo was in that spot. Jonathan Brooks was not available as he was coming back from that ACL. And you look at Trevin Wallace, 3rd round, that's a spot where typically when you draft a guy that high, you're expecting to come in and immediately contribute. Now, Carolina was expecting him to come in, probably be a special teamer and then contribute and start next year and replace Shaq Thompson, but it happened right away this year. He started 8 games, making 64 tackles, had 2 tackles for loss. Looking at his PFF grade, wasn't that great, didn't like jump out at you, but it was pretty similar to what Josey Jewell did. It was 56.0 and a 69th out of 84 linebackers. The linebacker that was right ahead of him was Josey Jewell. So he played at about the same level Josey Jewell played at, and he is a rookie. While Jewell, I think, was playing in his 7th or 8th season in the National Football League. Trevin Wallace came out, I thought, was fairly impressive considering what the expectations were for him back in April when he was first drafted. It was going to be, all right, you give him 1 year to understand the scheme, to get caught up to the speed of the game. Then in 2025, you're your starter. Well, he's your starter in 2024, and he's now your starter in 2025 and likely in the future as well as he continues to develop here in Carolina. A couple other guys had to step up when there was injuries to Trevin, to Shaq, and to Josey were Claude Sherlis, who was brought in a year ago off of the waiver wire as a special teamer after the Jets cut him. He made 2 starts this past season, 28 tackles, had a 63.3 PFF grade, which obviously was better when Trevin Wallace and what Josey Jewell able to do this past season. So that is a nice thing to see. Jacoby Windman also had to come in, the undrafted free agent out of Michigan State, had to start 2 games to close out the season, had 22 tackles, 1.5 sacks. He became the first player in the NFL to be flagged for a hip drop tackle. Had not happened all season long, and the NFL later came back and said that actually was the wrong call. It should not have been a hip drop tackle. And even on broadcast, Dean Blandino was saying they got it wrong. And well, the Panthers, unfortunately, were on the wrong side of that against Arizona. Unfortunately enough, even though James Conner was going off in that first half, he did get banged up in the second half, and the Panthers were able to come back, win that game in overtime with Chuba Hubbard high-stepping into the end zone. And Jacoby Windman showing you a little something. Now, his grade wasn't impressive, 50.5, but that's not that far off from what Trevin Wallace and what Josey Jewell, the primary starters this past season at linebacker, did. And Chandler Wooten also had to make a couple starts this season, had 30 tackles. His PFF grade was actually the lowest of all the linebackers that played this year with a 29.2. So again, in total, 6 different players started at inside linebacker. You would have thought that would have been only 2. And if there was going to be more than 2, it would be 3. With Trevin Wallace filling in, maybe because he won the job over Josey Jewell or Shaq Thompson during the season, or if those guys had to miss a game or 2, you did not expect to see 6 different guys and go that deep. Like Jacoby Windman was not, I don't think, in anybody's bingo card as somebody who's going to make a start at linebacker for the Carolina Panthers in 2024. So here's to better injury luck for this unit heading into 2025. But will Shaq Thompson be a part of this unit in 2025? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. Even if you're missing the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Have we seen the last of Shaq Thompson in process blue and black here in Carolina? I worried about that when he went down with that, what was framed as I think it was just a heel injury back when he went out in that third quarter against Cincinnati in week 4. I worried that that's non-contact. It's on an artificial surface, and Shaq Thompson has been the most vocal, not among the most, but the most vocal of all the Carolina Panthers last couple of years about not liking the field turf and not wanting to play on this surface and wanting the Panthers go back to grass. And plenty of fans have echoed that sentiment as well. I think just in opposition of David Tepper and what he's done to your beloved franchise. But certainly the NFLPA has come out and said that the players want grass. They practice on grass. Why can't they play on Sunday on grass? Well, because David Tepper wants to have concerts. And before David Tepper came here to Charlotte, we didn't have music. We were the town in Footloose, according to David Tepper. So thank you, Dave, for bringing us all these concerts, even though plenty of people still not coming. I didn't see Taylor Swift in the Eras Tour here in Charlotte, just saying. So, great job, Dave. But looking at the situation of Shaq Thompson, it may be over. He's going to be 31 this upcoming season. And if you look at it, he's missed 28 games past 2 years. And before that, he only missed 13 games in his first 8 seasons of his career in Carolina. And yes, all 10 years of his career in the NFL have been spent here in Carolina. He is now going to be a part of the NFL pension whenever he retires. So congratulations to Shaq for making it at least a decade in the NFL. It's what's going to happen now in whatever time he has left. And he did say during locker room cleanout last month in January that the past 2 injuries, the broken leg and ankle situation he suffered in Monday Night Football week 2 back in 23 against the Saints. And then looking at this past year, non-contact Achilles goes. And when it goes, man. I don't really know if there's necessarily you can do anything to prevent that. I know Christian McCaffrey, our old friend out there in San Francisco now, had Achilles tendonitis in both Achilles, which is just, man, what in the world? He flew all the way over to Germany to go talk to a specialist to figure out how he could come back and play. He did come back and play, and he did not suffer that injury. But typically when you have the Achilles tendonitis, and I'm not wishing this on Christian, this is just what's been said, that Achilles eventually goes one day. And we'll see for Shaq. It was obviously bad step. It goes. It was going to happen, I suppose. I don't know. It's fluky, certainly, but you missed 28 games past 2 seasons, and the Panthers have gone out there and they've drafted your replacement, Trevin Wallace, and he started most of last year with you out. And then they also signed Josey, Jewell, who had already been in this system before Vajero Vero. And you look at Josey Jewell's contract, if Carolina wanted to move on from him this offseason, it'd be kind of tough to do. $2 million of his 2025 salary is guaranteed. If they decide to cut him, there's $6.6 million in dead money, and they only save $1 million just over that against salary cap. It's the out in this contract is really after this upcoming season. So in 2026, it would be $2.3 million in dead money, and then they would save $5.5 million. So Josey Jewell is going to come back and be your starting inside linebacker again this season. So that spot is already taken. It just comes down to, would you rather have Shaq out there again in his 11th season coming off of 2 injury-plagued years, or do you want to stick with the rookie who you evaluated and you drafted and now you're developing into being the guy who eventually would replace Shaq Thompson? And Shaq did say as well that he believes he has 3 to 4 years left. He has said in the past how he wanted to stay with his brothers in Carolina. He wanted to finish his career here and all of that. But you look at some of the guys that were his brothers, well, DJ Moore's gone. Christian McCaffrey's gone. Brian Burns is gone. Dante Jackson is gone. All those guys, even before that. Luke Kuechly's gone. Thomas Davis is gone. All the guys you knew when he came to Carolina, aside from like J.J. Jansen, are gone. So we'll see what they decide to do here. And it's hard to say that he's not a good player. I still think he can be. I don't think it's like an apples comparison. I don't think it's ever smart to do this. Like, we know Thomas Davis had all those knee injuries, and that helped extend his career as he missed a lot of that time, which he was been rehabbing, and it didn't necessarily put the other wear and tear on his body. But like knee injuries are not insignificant. They are a lot easier to come back from now than they were 20 years or so when it was really a death sentence for someone's career, and probably even go really further back than that. But you look at the last time he was fully healthy in 2022, had a 72.3 PFF grade and an elite 90.3 run defense grade. I know I brought that up when we were talking about whether the Panthers' run defense could improve. I brought that up this past summer where I said he had an elite grade. And then you look at Derek Brown, who also had a 90 grade against the run. You have those two guys in there, your run defense will be better. And you look at this past season, what happened? Derek Brown tore his meniscus in that game against Saints, playing on it, and had one of the lowest grades according to PFF in that game, was out for the rest of the season. Shaq Thompson was out after the first 4 games of the season, and the Panthers gave up 3,000 yards on the ground. If Derek Brown and Shaq Thompson play this entire year, there's no way that happens. Are they going to be a good run defense? I doubt it. Maybe. It's possible that Derek Brown could have kept Shaq Thompson clean in the times where Derek was not able to do that, that Shaq could have cleaned things up there and filled those gaps. It's certainly possible, but overall, just looking at how the unit played together, which was kind of the problem, and Dave Canales talked about guys not necessarily being connected and doing their jobs, maybe it would not have been that much better, but certainly would not have been the worst run defense. Maybe it would have been, but I don't know. I just think that if he would have played, clearly this is a better defense. And that's like kind of like a duh, Julian. They're a better defense with Shaq and with Derek Brown. You just have to wonder, like with Derek Brown next year, you're not super concerned about Derek Brown coming back and playing at a Pro Bowl level. With Shaq Thompson having missed 28 games past 2 seasons, and even when he was healthy, like in 21 and in 22, he kind of had the knee issues, a little bit of that he played through. Is he going to be the same Shaq Thompson that we knew and loved here in Carolina, or is he going to be a diminished player? And looking over at Spot Track, the place for contracts, his market value, according to them, is 1 year and just over $1 million. That is not a crazy contract to sign him to. Now, there are some void years that Carolina has to deal with. I don't know necessarily if they re-sign him, how that is going to impact them salary cap-wise this upcoming season, but there was already going to be some dead money with Shaq not on the roster this upcoming year in Carolina if he ends up not being on the roster. So I don't know. Brett Tillis is there to figure that kind of stuff out, and I do think he'll likely do a good job. As I look at some of the deals that they signed last year and some of the moves that they made a lot of sense in opening up some cap space and giving the Panthers some flexibility, but also not making it to where they're going to have to pay the rent down the road and really have them in a pretty salary cap tight situation moving forward. So if you want to sign Shaq to a 1-year deal and let him just prove it and come in here and fight for a job, because that's what you'd be telling him is, all right, Shaq, we want you back. You've been a team captain. I know the last 2 years have been fluke injuries. Those are your words. Maybe you still have 3 or 4 years left, but before we can sign you up for that, we can sign you up for 1 year and give you more than a vet man because you've been our guy. And probably they'll give him more than the $1 million market value that's out there at Spot Track. And that's not what everybody always gets. The market values, I think, are a lot lesser than what these guys end up signing for when looking at Spot Track. But still, you can offer them, I don't know, $2.5 million, $3 million, and have it be an incentive laden contract where if he's able to start and he is healthy, Pro Bowl or whatever, he can get up to like $8-9 million, something like that, to keep him around if you want to do it. Or you can just decide that we got Trevin. He played last year and he looked pretty good. And we feel like this is a defense that's got to get younger. It's got to bring in some new talent, and it's time to move on to a new era. And also Josey Jewell can't really get out of that deal. So he's going to be our starter next year, and maybe he's going to be our starter in 2026 as well. Like, that's what they could tell Shaq. So to me, it feels like his time is up, and I do not think you can ignore the fact that he has been very vocal about the lack of a grass surface inside Bank of America Stadium. That's not changing as far as the surface and likely his criticism of what is the owner who's leasing out the building from the city. It's the owner who he's criticizing when he says that. It makes me think, especially with how the way Tepper is, that his time's likely up in Carolina. It's been 10 years, 10 beautiful years. He had to wait his turn behind TD and behind Luke, and he finally got out there, and I thought he played well. It's just unfortunate that these last 2 seasons he has not been healthy, has not been his best self, and that's probably going to be the end for Shaq here in Carolina. So how else will the Panthers approach the offseason? Could they possibly look at drafting another linebacker come April? We'll talk about that here on Locked On Panthers. Football season may be over, but basketball is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. How will the Panthers approach the offseason at linebacker? Looking at it right now, there are only 2 free agents. Shaq Thompson, who we just talked about, who feels like his time is done. Just looking at, they drafted the guy, his replacement, Trevin Wallace, and I think all of us felt like that was the case back in April when Trevin Wallace was surprisingly, at least from all the observers and people who had talked about it, taken with that 3rd round pick by Carolina to be their linebacker. Obviously, they were looking towards the future and looking at who they had to replace eventually, and that was Shaq Thompson, who was coming up on the final year of his deal in Carolina with, of course, some void years there, tacked on after they reworked his deal last offseason, when he did also say, would you take a pay cut? And, well, he did take a pay cut, apparently, obviously, to stay in Carolina, and I don't think he's looking to necessarily take one, but the linebacker market, I don't know how robust it's going to be for someone like Shaq Thompson, who's missed the last 2 seasons, but we'll see what works out for Shaq. Chandler Wooten also is a free agent, but he's an exclusive rights free agent. Him and LeBron Ray, both those guys, I don't really feel like Carolina should be sweating over bringing those guys back. Maybe they bring back Wooten because of special teams. Certainly don't want him to have to step in and play linebacker. They're going to have to improve the depth there at the position, regardless of what they decide to do with Shaq and with Chandler Wooten. Now, if they have Shaq and they have Trevin and they have Josey back, you feel pretty good about that trio. But behind that trio, as we saw this past season, wasn't a lot. But that's the NFL. Not a lot of teams are going to have starting caliber linebackers ready to go when your top 2 guys come off the field. And just look at the snap counts that they have. That's a position that today in the NFL, and probably from really always, those guys just don't come off the field. So you hope to have depth, but it's not like you're going to have a lot of guys. And you looked at your prior Kamu Grier-Hill and with Deion Jones, better situation as you had 2 guys that were veterans. One of them that was a really good special teams player who also played well. I think he was in Minnesota, Kamu was this year, but he was somebody who really helped out Carolina when they lost Shaq and when they had to have some guys step up. So we'll see. And I would think that they would need to really look at finding some veterans, and there's plenty up there that are coming up. And I looked at the list. It's like, all right, a lot of older guys, not anybody that really jumps off the page at you. But certainly I would think that they're going to add a true veteran who's either started or who's played enough snaps in this league to be the backup, whether they have Shaq Thompson back or not. But I would think the backup to Trevin and the Josey, who again, $2 million of his contract's guaranteed this offseason for this upcoming season. And then there's not an out. The out's in 2026 after this season, $6.6 million in dead money, and they only saved just over $1 million. There's really no benefit to doing that with Josey Jewell. So he'll be the starter this upcoming season. He needs to play well enough to prove that he should be the starter again in 2026. And speaking of proving whether he can be the starter again in 2026, we did not expect Carolina to take Trevin Wallace. We did not expect them to take a linebacker, really. It's not even about the player that they took. It's about the position that they took and when they took it there in the 3rd round. Because you take a guy in the 3rd round, you're taking someone to come in and to play and to be your starter moving forward for that rookie contract and maybe beyond if you hit on them. I'm looking at right now, Trevin's going to be under his rookie deal next 3 years, and he's got 3 seasons to prove that he should be the linebacker of the future past those 3 seasons of his rookie deal coming up here, starting again in 2025 for year 2. And Josey could be done after this year. So do you start looking ahead again to the future and look at linebacker again and then have somebody come in and hopefully be the backup? But if they win the job and it's them and Trevin, not really the worst thing in the world. There's a couple of guys that I'm looking over at PFF's big board. I would think that if you do this, it's not going to be at 8. I don't think it's going to be at 57 right in the 2nd round. It's not official, but I think it's going to be 57. And in the 3rd round, I don't know if that would be the time, but 4th round early on, then would that be the time? Like Barrett Carter from Clemson, you got Jack Kaiser from Notre Dame, Kobe King from Penn State, Cody Simon from Ohio State, Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma. Like, those are 5 names that you've probably heard of if you follow college football closely. As, of course, I think every single one of those teams, Oklahoma's terrible this past year, but every one of those teams aside from Oklahoma, every one of those players, aside from Stutzman, played in the playoff. Carter only in the first round, but Kaiser going to the national title game, King going to the semifinal, Cody Simon winning a national title at Ohio State. Stutzman was a dude who could have came out last year and decided to stick around in Norman for one more year as Oklahoma was transitioning into the SEC, and he was a part of an elite defense. That's the problem with OU this past year is they had a great offense when they had Lincoln Riley before he ditched them to go to Southern Cal, and that's not really working out for him right now, but they never had a good defense. Now it's the inverse where their defense is excellent, championship level, but their offense has been terrible down there at Oklahoma. At least it was terrible this past year with all the receiver injuries, but that's a guy that has great leadership, solid athlete that I would be interested in, but I would really be cool with any of those 5 coming in here. I mean, Simon played a long time, so maybe not a dude who's like a 6-year player or whatever that is. I mean, you can't keep track how long these college guys are sticking around. Now, that does allow them to be more ready-made, certainly, but you still want to have somebody that you can have even past your rookie contract, which I think is probably why they didn't want Peyton Wilson at NC State, who played well in Pittsburgh. It was the whole situation with the knee and him maybe being only a one-contract guy, as that was the company line that was put out there across the NFL around draft time. But the dude's a heck of a player. Barrett Carter, like him. Kaiser, like him a lot. So I would think that it could make sense maybe early on there in day 3, in the 4th round, if Carolina looks at it and they see, all right, there's a linebacker who's put a lot of snaps, who is healthy, who can come in here, be a backup one year, and then come in and start alongside Trevin in 2026. They decide to move on from Josey, Jewell. So that's maybe how Carolina will approach it. But I do think that Shaq's done. Chandler, I mean, special teamer if he comes back. I would not think it'd be crazy at all to draft somebody again. And then, of course, you need to bring in some veteran guys to be backups. And you have Clyde Sherrills coming back again. So that's helpful that he started last year briefly. He's a special teams kind of guy as well. To have him bring in someone with a little bit more experience and probably a higher floor than what Clyde Sherrills gives you as the backup at inside linebacker behind Josey, Jewell and behind Trevin Wallace coming up here in 2025. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe, follow the show free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Friday I'm back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And I'll talk to y'all tomorrow as we start to look at the secondary and we talk about the corners in Carolina's. J.C. Horn about to get extended. Will Mike Jackson be back? And or will they maybe even draft somebody in the draft? We'll talk about that here on Locked On Panthers on Thursday.